sometimes you just got to get mad, because if you don't get mad, you don't get anywhere. And I need to work on this 49 Chev, but the garage is so jammed up tight. I put my 29 Dodge on the trailer a couple days ago because we were having like huge rains here, and I didn't want that trailer to sit out there getting rotten, so I've just stained the deck again, and then yeah, I put the Dodge on it and parked it in here, so it's really tight. So the 49 Chev is, you know, jammed against the workbench. So yesterday I actually had to take the stair railing off of the stairs here, so that I have this like little pathway that I can walk through. If you kind of bend backwards, you can do it. But you have to be careful you don't trip. There she goes. All right, so sun's shining these days, so we can just park outside. And so we have some room to work inside. So my wife's away this week, up north helping the kids move. And I've got all my important work done halfway through the week. Today's Thursday. I got a few hours, and I'm determined to get something done on this car. And I'm going to tell you why that's important a bit later. But today I want to talk about how to build a dash when you are morphing two cars together, a 49 Chev Fleetline and an 06 Cadillac CTS. Going to use the gauges out of the Cadillac and as much of the dash of the 49 Chev as I can. So we got to get to the inside of the car, and that's where we're going to do some work. Now last year I got all of the welding done on the car, the doors, fenders, around the back, rocker panels, and the whole thing welded together, the 49 body onto the 06 Cadillac. And my goal last year was to get all of the welding done so that this year when I came home I could just work on the next thing, which would probably be body work. But I didn't get all of the welding done, honestly, because I didn't finish the dashboard inside the car. I want to use the Cadillac gauges, but make it look as much, you know, period correct as I can. And so I don't know if we'll be able to keep part of the dash. I love the 49 Chev dash, of course. I mean, that's a beautiful piece of art. But my air conditioning, my big HVAC unit in the Cadillac, which is still there and all working and never been taken apart. I've modified all of the defrosters and made them fit into the 49 body and added a couple extras for the corner windows. I like to keep the frost off the windows in Canada. But then a lot of that HVAC system that's part of the Cadillac kind of sticks through where the old dash would go. So I removed the bottom half of the 49 Chev dash. Now this dash, I think I can take it apart right along here, all the way across. Just drill out the spot welds and take the bottom off and leave the top there. If I can leave the top there, that will be really helpful in maintaining. It's like the survey post, you know, when you're surveying land, you've got a corner post that you measure everything to. And I think this is going to be helpful, having this thing stay the same. I'll take all this stuff off first, and then we'll drill these out down the sides, cross all the way across there, and yeah, that should work. I've got the top half still in the car, the bottom half laying on the floor. Okay, let's move some stuff around. So we're gonna need to pull some of the stuff out from inside, or rearrange it inside. I wonder how many days I get to work on this car. I bet you today and tomorrow, but that dash is going to take quite a bit of work. When it comes to hacking up the old car, don't be afraid to cut. The worst that can happen is you have to weld something back into place later. And that can be done, right? So just go ahead and cut. After a reasonable amount of measuring and contemplating and angle viewing and making sure that you're doing your best, just go ahead, pull the trigger on that angle grinder and cut. I find it's really worth putting a sanding disc on it, a flap disc, and getting rid of the sharp edges, because there's like little slivers and knife edges that are left on everything that you zip cut. So you look at the hole in the 49 Chev dash now, and you look at this gauge cluster out of the Cadillac, and you're like, okay, how am I going to stick these two together? How am I going to make it stay in place? I can put a hood over top of the gauges, since that's going to be our next project, but somehow I've got to make the gauge cluster stick in there. We'll go with 20 gauge because 18 gauge is tougher to work with by far. Yeah, not as forgiving. There is one little ridge around the edge of the gauge cluster, the plastic housing of it, that a piece of this 9 gauge wire will probably fit nicely into. And so if I can have that, you know, welded to the underside of that hood over top of the gauge cluster. The shape of this thing, I'm going to have the top come down to here, and then the bottom piece is going to have to go up. This is the widest point, and this will actually come down to even with the ridge on the dash, the top part of the dash where the dash joins. So I think that'll match up nicely. Then we will figure out the curve, and we'll actually fold it back so that it has a nice lip on the edge. And in the middle of all this moving around, cutting and welding and grinding, I want to keep this gauge cluster from getting scratched up. But that's a challenge. Love an English wheel because the old 49 Chev doesn't have any like flat spots or straight lines on it hardly, and so everything needs a little bit of a bulge to it. And I don't have a real fancy design that I'm going for, other than I want the top of this dash to kind of match the old dash, and for that reason I put a nice bulge in here. So we'll smooth it off, and then we'll cut the front end of it, the shape that goes over top of the gauges, kind of like the peak that comes out from the dash. And then we will bead roll that, fold it over, and make a nice edge on it. I find it fascinating that car manufacturers, you know, make these big, huge tools and dies that stamp out cars with such intricate engineered curves and areas, and yeah, all about strength versus weight ratio. And we'll be doing good if we just put a curve in the top of this piece that we're making so that it looks half decent in the old 49. But I do love what you can do with an English wheel. And I've only used it, you know, a few times really. So it's not like I've been able to get good at it yet. But it has more to do with patience and then doing it over again. If it doesn't work. Okay, this is my second try. On the first try, I bent the rim over first along the front, and then I couldn't English wheel it because it was double thickness in part of the area there. I tried it, but it wouldn't. I couldn't get close enough to the edge. So I'm doing the bulge first here, putting the curve in the panel, and then we'll fold it over and make a nice peak. The other thing I got to make sure is that I'm very careful with that bead roller, because I've got my curve drawn on here where I want to bend it over, and the outside one here is where I want to cut it. But to do that, Yeah, that's pretty nice. To do that, I've got to follow that line exactly. Yeah, and it's hard to do on a bead roller. I don't know. What do you think? It's pretty nice. Pretty nice to me. And you know, we're just guessing anyway, right? So attempt number 2 didn't really work either. Because when you bead roll the lip up around that curve around the front, too much material gathers in there and they couldn't shrink it enough to make it lay down flat and look decent. So, what's the answer? Cut it off. Cut the whole thing off. Keep the nice bulged panel and then just weld another one of those 9-gauge wires to the very front, and that'll give me my nice smooth round lip, and probably smoother than what I could bead roll that. And then that 9-gauge wire that's going to fit into the groove of the gauge cluster. The trick to welding that in, because you don't want to put weld on the side of that wire because it'll be gobbed then and that won't fit into the groove on that plastic gauge cluster. So the deal is then to drill holes through the other side and then plug weld through the hole, and that's what'll hold it on. That way you won't have a bunch of weld material inside there. So we'll just take this on with a plug weld from the back in a few places, and that will make it a nice clean job and it'll hold it in place perfectly. There's the top half roughed in. Okay, so that will mate to the top half of the dash in the car. Here's the old one. That's what the old piece looks like that we cut out of there. All right, so it was just a round 49 Chev gauge, okay, and we're replacing it with this one. And so we'll get the top welded in so that we know exactly where it needs to go, and then we'll make some kind of a bracket underneath for this to bolt to. These video clips would look a lot better if my garage wasn't so full of junk. Well, I think this has taken a lot longer than I thought it would. I was going to be a lot further ahead in this episode of building Cherry Red. But all we're going to get done today is that dome, the ceiling over top of the gauge cluster. Now we'll take some time and make sure that we weld it and, you know, form it into the original dash of the 49. Do it as good as we can, you know, because you want a really nice job in the end, and a lot of it is standing back and looking and measuring however you can to get it in the center, you know, lined up with the center of the steering column now, because I believe that's it, lined up with the center of the original steering column, lined up with the center of the seat, so that it all looks good when all said and done. The last thing you want is to sit in this car when it's done and the steering wheel's a little bit to the right, the gauges are a little bit to the left, or they're pointing too up high or too down low, you can't read them. So it takes some time, right, to go through all of that, and dream time and imagination time and a lot of measuring time. So yeah, we just spend, you know, some hours getting this thing tacked into place, make sure we don't warp anything. And then next episode, we'll get into building the bottom half of this dash. And one more thing, why it is important to get something done on your project. You don't want to be that guy that has a project that's like sitting there for 10 years, 50, didn't realize how long it's been since I did anything on it, until finally you just throw up your hands and sell a thing. That's my reoccurring nightmare. I want to finish it. But here's the trick, is it seems that if you will buckle down, clean up the clutter, and do something, anything, something, at least something on the project every time you get an opportunity. No, every time you can make an opportunity. Then the thing will continue to move ahead, march ahead. Now, a lot of these projects, I've done projects that are 10 years long, because I only get to work on it a little bit at a time. I'm in Canada for what, 2 to 4 months out of the year maybe, and then I'm not home for half of that. So, you know, it's a day is an amazing thing to get a whole day out here, because even when I am home, there's all these other things to do. And you know, there's a pile of projects around you. Just think of all the stuff you got to do. just ignore some of the other projects. Hey, because I've had to ignore this one for a while, haven't I, to get that deck done? Well, no, I'm not ignoring this one. I'm working on this one. But it's absolutely true. And it works in pretty well every area of life. I noticed that my wife is a lot happier in a home where there's a project completed at least every year, maybe once every 6 months, whatever it may be. So fixing the deck here over the last month has been a real blessing for her, and it just makes her feel like we care about the house, we're moving ahead, even though there's so many other things that need to be done and I just don't have time to do them. Oh, it's just never ending, eh? But do something on each area that you want to maintain progress in, and your projects will keep marching on.
If you're bored like me, you need to subscribe. Make sure to subscribe to Car Cobbler. It's my grandpa's channel, Car Cobbler channel.